Thank you, Vedant. Welcome back, friends. I hope you enjoyed the Indian lunch. There's more coming. So save your palate. And yeah, if you're risk takers, then go for every dish. If you're worried about spice levels, then, exercise discretion. Um, so, this panel is actually about the very unique situation created with the persecution of the Hizmet movement in Turkey over the last decade and the forced exile of tens of thousands of them as refugees. Um, so, as you know, forced displacement is a global problem, and there are certain groups that have been targeted and have faced very serious risks to their lives and liberties and property in many parts of the world, and who have fled their homelands. So, how they relocate, where they go, what kind of impact they have in the host societies, which absorb them or which are not willing to absorb them, and what kind of hopes do they have of returning back to where they came from, their native lands. This is the big, tragedy of refugees. And as you know, right now, with so many wars and human rights abuses peaking in many parts of the world, we are looking at record number of refugees and internally displaced people and conflict affected, forcibly displaced people in many parts of the world. But this particular panel is focused more on the Hizmet experience, especially of the last 10 years, what they have done in exile. And is it possible for them to sustain the social cohesion and to also continue to advocate for their less fortunate sisters and brothers who are in jail and who are being tortured and abused by the authorities in Turkey? And is it even possible for them to one day reclaim their homeland? And while they are in exile, the kind of activities they're doing, the kind of integration and relations they have with the local communities, it's a fascinating subject. And many of you in the audience themselves, you belong to that community of exiles. So we are going to be looking at different dimensions of this phenomenon, and overall what this exile, or I think migration, although the title says migration, is more voluntary. It's mostly for economic reasons, but we are talking more about those who have been displaced due to state persecution. So they're more like refugees rather than migrants. But nonetheless, people moving across borders far away from their native lands is a phenomenon. It's a big global challenge, and Hizmet exile community is a subset of this larger global problem. So we're going to be talking about that today. And we have regrets from our friend from Nigeria who's not able to make it, Abu Bakar. But we have three outstanding scholars from other regions who are here with us, and who will share their experiences of being in this quote-unquote transnational space, and whether these movements, while culturally they still have coherence, what kind of social impact are they having in their countries of domicile, and ultimately how are they linked back to developments in Turkey, and can they shape Turkey in a better way from outside? That is always something of great interest to us as scholars. So, without further ado, let me request our first speaker, Hilal Akdeniz, to talk about Hizmet refugees spread across the world. We will then follow with some more of these reflections. Let's please welcome Hilal Akdeniz.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me today at this important conference in your lovely country, India. My name is Hilal Akdeniz, and I'm a researcher at the Foundation for Dialogue and Education in Berlin. Actually, I'm working on my PhD at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Today, I would like to speak about biographical ruptures and identity transformations after a failed coup attempt of July 15th in 2016 in Turkey, and more specifically about how individuals affiliate with the Hizmet movement narrate persecution, exile, and reorientation across transnational contexts. This presentation is part of my ongoing doctoral research in sociology, so based on 20 biographical narrative interviews, and I will present interim results. Let me begin with a sentence from one of my interviewees. Overnight, I became a traitor in my own country. Similar sentences I heard from so many interviews, so this is not in one case, many of them felt similar. This sentence does not only describe a political accusation, it describes a biographical rupture. Within days, individuals who had perceived themselves as educators, civil servants, or engaged professionals were redefined as security threats. The rupture was abrupt, it was existential, and it reshaped entire life trajectories. On the night of July 15, 2016, a faction within the Turkish military attempted to overthrow the government. The attempt failed. According to official figures, approximately 250 to 265 people were killed that night, and more than 2,000 were injured. The event marked a moment of profound collective shock. What followed was a prolonged state of emergency that lasted 2 years. In the aftermath, at least 77,000 people were formally arrested in the first 2 years. You can imagine, actually we have 9 years after this date, and this number is really increasing huge. Around 130,000 public servants were dismissed or suspended from their positions. Hundreds of thousands were investigated on terrorism-related charges. Since 2016, estimates suggest that up to 500,000 individuals have been detained at some point in connection with these investigations. After 9 years, the AKP government is still blocking an independent commission investigation into the events of the night of the coup. There's no evidence to prove who was actually responsible for this terrible act. In addition, large numbers of citizens left the country, including academics, professionals, civil servants, and entire families, reshaping Turkish diasporic landscapes across Europe and North America. For many of my interviewees, this period marks a decisive biographical rupture. My central research question is, how do politically persecuted, upwardly mobile individuals affiliated with the Hizmet movement narrate rupture, loss, and reorientation across transnational spaces? I am less concerned with reconstructing political events themselves and more with understanding how individuals process with these events biographically. Let me show you my methodology. This study is based on 20 biographical narrative interviews, as I told, and these are conducted in transnational contexts. Following the methodological approach of biographical process analysis, interviews begin with an open narrative invitation, allowing participants to structure their life stories according to their own internal relevance. These analyses focus on trajectories of suffering, moments of collapse, and attempts at narrative restabilization. This project is ongoing, and the findings I present today are preliminary. My sample is, I would say, quite interesting, still interesting after a few years. Most participants in my sample share several characteristics. They originate from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds and they experience upward mobility through education. You could call it also a transformation. Their educational and civic biographies were shaped with religious, ethical commitments. Before 2016, many held respected professional positions, and after 2016, many experienced professional dismissal, financial ruin, and social delegitimation, and eventual also exile. Now let me show you my analytical findings. So the first key finding is that post-2016 period is narrated not simply as political repression, but as total biographical collapse. Participants describe sudden job loss, frozen bank accounts, revoked passports, social distancing, and profound uncertainty. Within weeks, stable middle-class lives turned into precarity. Several described and the experiences as the form of social death. Importantly, this collapse was experienced not only as institutional punishment, but as moral delegitimation. The second finding concerns ostracism. Exclusion operated on multiple levels. There was legal prosecution by state institutions, there was public stigmatization, there was distancing by colleagues, and in some cases even silence or rupture within extended family networks. This created a condition of relational isolation. The loss was not only economic, it was social, symbolic, and deeply personal. Many interviewees reported on their role as role models for citizens. They said that they had gone to the police stations on their own initiative, assuming that there must have been some misunderstanding when they learned that they were wanted. None of them had anything to do with the coup. While in pretorial detention and during their subsequent prison sentences, they experienced traumatic, deeply degrading treatment and in some cases torture. Filled with shame, they confided their stories to me. They said, quote, "Something like this must never happen again. I want my story to be scientifically documented and to bear witness to this terrible act." Quote end. They entrusted me with their life stories. One of the most striking findings is what is absent. Across 20 interviews, I did not encounter narratives of revenge or violent retaliation. Despite severe repression, there were no expressed desires of vengeance. Instead, I encountered grief, ethical reflection, theological questioning, and self-critique. Some participants critically reassessed internal structures of the movement. Others reflected on their own political assumptions. Rather than radicalization, repression appears to have intensified moral reflexivity. This challenges simplified assumptions that political persecution inevitably produce violent counter-identities. However, hope remains present, but it is relocated. Many participants do not imagine rebuilding their futures in Turkey. Instead, hope is projected into transnational space, into new educational opportunities, new civic participation, new beginnings elsewhere. This relocation of hope signals a profound transformation of belonging. Home becomes less a territorial certainty and more a negotiated transnational construction. So what does this contribute sociologically? First, it refines our understanding of trajectories of suffering under contemporary state repression. Second, it highlights the centrality of narrative identity work with when institutional recognition collapse. Third, it complicates linear models linking repression to radicalization. And finally, it shows how exile becomes a site of repositioning, morally, socially, and existentially. Let me conclude with this. The individuals in this study experience financial destruction, social exclusion, legal insecurity, and forced migration within a broader landscape in which hundreds of thousands were investigated, detained, or dismissed. Yes, yet we stand out in their narratives is not hatred. It is the struggle to maintain moral coherence under conditions of delegitimation. Political repressions does not automatically produce extremism. It produces complex process of biographic reconfiguration marked by suffering, reflexivity, and difficult reconstruction of agency in exile. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hilal. Having suffered so much, to not resort to violent, revenge or radicalization, it's rare, right? And I think it's worth analyzing why, because there are many exiled or refugee communities that form militant movements, armed, and try to launch armed struggles and try to overthrow the regime back home and all that. But here, this is totally different, what we are hearing. And indeed, it's a very special. The only parallel which I can think of here in this part of the world are the Tibetan refugees in India. We have about 85, around less than 100,000 Tibetan refugees here who have been here since 1950s, 60s. More than 60 years. The Dalai Lama is here, a figure very similar to Fethullah Gulen. And he was very clear from the start that we cannot, launch armed insurrection and try to overthrow the communist dictatorship in China. If Tibet has to be liberated, it will take time, If not in our lifetime, then, in the longer time horizon, it will happen. So they have actually refrained from violence completely. And even though there is a younger generation of Tibetan refugees here in India who feel like they must, avenge the loss of their homeland and the suffering and the occupation by China, they have not resorted to violence or to radicalization. So I see a lot of parallels with, but I do hope you don't have to wait for 60 years or 100 years to go back. But what I'm simply saying is that this path may be more arduous and requires more patience, and generation to generation you have to cultivate this strategic patience rather than to think about more radical methods of getting justice. Okay, we also have Arvind Hussain now. Let me request him to come and speak as well. Respected scholar who's also going to talk about a similar phenomenon, but from a more what he calls emotional analysis of the Hizmet immigrants. I would prefer to call them refugees, just to make the technical distinction between those who are going for economic reasons versus those who have been persecuted. Arvind, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. For an unaccounted eye or a person who is not very familiar with the latest developments of the Hizmet movement, it might sound strange, weird to talk about Hizmet movement in relation to migration or worse, refugees. But unfortunately, this is what happened. After 2016, people from Turkey, masses of people from Turkey were labeled as terrorists, and in one way or another, as it had been stated before here, had to flee the country to Western countries. not in order to look for better living conditions or seeking how it is to interact with a different culture than your own, but rather in order to actually or better to say this migration, because sometimes it's a migration, sometimes might be a form of refugee movement with its own dynamic. This anyway was driven by conflict, labeling, or persecutions, as well as a sense of insecurity and instability, leading to a movement that generated its own dynamics. So Turkey is a well-known country, both as a receiver and as a sender of immigrants, but this kind of migration that took place in the last couple of years has a specific dynamic, nuances of its own, totally different than the previous migrations that took place, let's say in Germany, for example, is the best known and researched case. So we are going to touch upon this as much as the time will allow. And to look at the dynamics of this particular kind of migration. So actually, this is data from an ongoing research that aims to look at how these people have settled into the adopting countries, have they moved over this traumatic experience, were they integrated properly, what is their perception related to this experience, what are the perceptions of the locals that came into contact with these people. These kind of questions are aimed to be answered by this, as I said, ongoing research. The primary data for this study was obtained through careful, in-depth analysis of interviews. There are semi-structured interviews taking between 1 hour and 1 hour and a half with Hizmet Movement immigrants residing in different countries. At the moment of interview, they were already settled in the residing countries that investigate their life stories with a focus on the migration process and the emotional, perceptive changes this brought. So, first of all, some descriptive statistics to understand the profile of the participants to these interviews. You can see a breakdown of the countries where these people have settled. As you can see, almost half of the participants are settled in Germany. Mr. Ercan, for those who were present here at the previous session, he mentioned about the importance of Germany for the Hizmet movement, the rising importance of the Hizmet movement in Germany after 2016. And here we can see also that lots of people have actually settled in Germany. And then it's followed by countries like USA, UK, Canada, and some other European countries. In terms of the age, again, this is also a particular aspect. You can see that 94% of the participants were middle-aged, which basically means over 40 years old, with strong careers, well-respected in Turkey, prolific careers prior to 2016. All are university graduates holding degrees in different domains, and you see only 6% of them were, we can say, young, under the age of 35 at the beginning of their careers, but even those have distinguished themselves in the countries, in the adopting countries. For example, there is one lady who won the prize for the best immigrant integration in USA. This is a prize that is given only for one person per year in the whole country, in the United States. Another person got the City Hall Scholarship for Immigrants in Germany, and so on. In terms of you can also see all of them were university graduates with strong careers, as I said, and among them 8 hold also academic titles. They are scholars, highly revered scholars. They were in Turkey, researchers, university professors, and so on. In terms of the original domains of activities, again, you can see from this graph that almost half of the participants were active in domains like education and teaching, whether it is at pre-university level or at the university level, followed by another percentage, a significant percentage of people who were active in the economical sector, businessmen and so on. This is not surprisingly given the fact that, as you may know, the Hizmet movement had always distinguished itself, especially through the educational establishments that were highly seen, highly valued, both in Turkey as well as abroad. This means, of course, a specific status. It's possible only through educators, properly trained educators, that are backed by philanthropists, by businessmen, sponsors who are willing to invest in education. So this is why we have this breakdown here, but also interestingly, you can see that there are significant percentages of people, of immigrants, that were active in sectors like engineering, technology, especially IT here comes on the first place, but also health, medicine, and here basically I mean doctors and nurses. Also, what the study had revealed, the analysis of the data we gathered so far, it has shown that you can see a very significant percentage, more specifically 69%, there is a 69% retention rate of the domain of the activity in the adopting country. So basically this means that if they were teachers, they continued their career as teachers in the adopting country. If they were doctors, they did the same. Some of them also got at the universities, and they are also teaching at the university level as well, going through all the bureaucracy, getting the proper certificates and acknowledgements specific to the local government in that respect. And another significant percentage of the remaining people have also declared in the interviews that they are also willing to move on and gather their domain of activities they are specialists in. So in this analysis, we have looked at the data that we have gathered in this way through these semi-structured interviews, and through a specific methodology. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it's described in the paper for those who are interested. There had been some sub-teams that later merged into, you can see, 4 themes. This is a thematic analysis. This is why it's called like that. So 4 major themes had come out after the specific analysis of these semi-structured interviews. So in what follows, I'm going to very briefly and in a very concentrated way describe these themes, given the limited amount of time available, and then I shall close with the conclusion and hopefully give you a more general idea of the outcomes of this research. So you can see the 4 themes that came out, that merged after this analysis. So the first one, it's of course trauma narration and resilience. This theme describes patterns of meaning across interview extracts that illuminate the psychological, relational and existential dimensions of migrant experiences. It reveals a trauma landscape that is multi-layered and deeply relational. The participants' experiences cannot be reduced to political persecution alone. Rather, they encompass familial rupture and grief, professional erasure and institutional betrayal, community-driven stigmatization, and identity fragmentation in exile. There are lots of examples, specific cases that came out from these interviews. So these narratives reflect what migration scholars describe as ambiguous loss. This ambiguous loss, this is a term, a recurrent term, a very common term used in the literature, that describes a form of grief without closure, intensified by political exile and the impossibility of return. So it's a state of improbability, of unknown, whether they will be able to come back to the country in their future life. People who were not able to attend their parents' funerals or close relatives, people who have not been talking to their brothers and sisters for years, and so on. Several participants articulated experiences of institutional betrayal, where the very systems they had served turned against them. One interview described receiving an appreciation diploma from the Ministry of Health, he was working at that time at this organization, only to be abruptly dismissed afterwards. The juxtaposition of recognition and expulsion underscores the arbitrariness of the purge and the psychological disorientation it produced. Beyond state persecution, participants described a secondary layer of trauma stemming from community hostility. Again, there are lots of examples. I'm not going to get into details now. Just to give you one, maybe most striking example of social exclusion, was a man expelled from the mosque he was going to every day, this in quote. Given the centrality of religious spaces in community life in Turkey, as in any Muslim country, this expulsion constituted a symbolic excommunication. The contrast with his experience experience in Greece. He had to illegally cross to Greece afterwards. The contrast were, in quote, they prepared a special place for him to pray. Christians, Greek Christians. This highlights the dissonance between rejection at home and unexpected hospitality abroad. Participants explicitly note that without faith, the overwhelming nature of their problems would be unbearable. This highlights the centrality of spiritual resilience in navigating trauma. The traumatic experiences led most of the participants to existential questions like, why am I here? Signaling a move from reactive coping to deeper inquiry into purpose, vocation, and fate. Existential questioning reframes circumstance as an invitation to discern meaning beyond survival. This interpretative turn can reorient agency, guiding choices about community building, testimony, and future aims. Which brings us to the second theme that looks at the second natural step that should follow, the social integration. What's the state in this respect? So this second theme highlights how migrants interpret integration not only as adapting to host societies, but also as actively contributing through education, intercultural dialogue, and community service, while simultaneously negotiating stigma and misrecognition. It coherently captures how Hizmet migrants interpret integration as a two-way process, adapting to host norms while offering civic and educational contributions, describing the range of consistent and sustained efforts to represent themselves and fight stigma. The analysis revealed that migrants interpret their present not as passive assimilation, but as a service-oriented contribution consistent with the movement ethos of Hizmet, which, as we all know, means service. Thus, integration is perceived as both a challenge and an opportunity. Professor Paul Weller had a paper published in 2022 where he mentioned this dual aspect of integration of the Hizmet movement representatives. Regardless of the type of job performed, all participants consider themselves well integrated in their field of work with warm and cordial relations, in quote, to their colleagues, as one of the persons interviewed described. With regards to the integration in the neighborhood, the review of the immigrants' reports revealed the fact that, in most cases, they took the initiative to introduce themselves and later invite their neighbors to dinner, especially on festivities, at the beginning. Mr. Clayton, again, he talked at the previous panel, and he was mentioning the friendship dinners. So as we can see here, the tradition continues even in this context. So this strategy of introducing yourself and inviting people to your house to get to know each other better upon moving to a new neighborhood is a common, well-established practice among the members of the Hizmet movement, even while in Turkey. So it is no surprise that this method has for even in the migration context. Local people have responded positively to the immigrants' initiatives, as could be understood by their accounts in this matter, because we also got to talk to neighbors, colleagues, and other representatives. Now they pay visits to each other's houses regularly, while in some cases they leave their house or their children in the care of their immigrant neighbor while being away for a longer period. There is also one case when the interviews had the local person, a widow, decided to donate their house to the immigrant's family. Okay, experiences of transformation and identity construction, very briefly. This theme illustrates the fact that for Hizmet members, migration after 2016 was not simply a forced relocation, but a profound reconfiguration of identity, belonging, and worldview. Narratives reveal migration as death and rebirth, a window of hope, a path to global citizenship, and a crucible of resilience. Generally, migration is perceived as a transformative journey, one that teaches tolerance, humility, and the discovery of self in a global context. Migration after 2016 was more than exile. It was a profound reconfiguration of values. Their accounts reveal lessons about the sanctity of humanity, the centrality of liberty and justice, the transience of life, and the need for purposeful resilience. Participants' narratives about the overall experience with the migration process reveal a wide range of subjective perceptions and perspectives. Thus, for some of the migrants, the experiences felt like opening a new white page in life, quote, a metaphor of rebirth, pointing to the novelty character of the migration with its strong potential of starting a whole new life. For instance, migration was described as a great occasion to interact with Western cultures and to become citizens of the world. And I'm also moving to the fourth one then. the cultural encounters. The fourth theme emphasizes the encounter as a meeting point where traditions carried by migrants intersect with the cultural norms of the adopting country. Migration is not merely a geographical relocation, but a profound cultural negotiation. For members of the Hizmet movement, immigrating to Western countries, integration involves both adaptation and contribution, viewed as a site of mutual transformations. This theme explores recurring themes in migrants' narratives, highlighting their lived experiences and the reciprocal cultural enrichment between migrants and host communities. At the same time, it explores the cultural experiences of Hizmet movement immigrants in Western countries through the lens of faith, identity and national identity. The interview accounts reveal how migrants perceive their responsibility as Muslims, how they negotiate stereotypes, and how they contribute to reshaping host societies' perceptions of Islam and Turkish identity. Themes include responsibility in representation, the transformation of perceptions through interaction, intercultural learning, and institutional recognition of migrants' contributions. You can see here in this diagram how these four elements flow into each other in a continuous pattern. It all starts with the responsibility in representation, being aware of your identity, interaction with the local people, the change in perception that takes time, of course, and this finally leads to the institutional recognition. Early migrants in Germany are described as having not changed at all in mentality. Later highlighted the gap between mediated stereotypes and lived encounters. Those who know about Islam from media have a negative perception. Those who know about Islam from interaction with Muslims have a positive perception. They believe their presence challenges media narratives, offering alternative representations of Islam. Actually, they were told many times, I have heard this, you are a different kind of Muslims. People found out about the real Islam through you. And actually, an integration director also acknowledged, since you changed our perception on immigrants, we need to work on new procedures that address your category. So the fourth one, the institutional recognition, comes into play. And finally, I'm just moving to the conclusions since we're very short of time. So this study demonstrates that the post-2016 migration of Hizmet movement members constitutes a multidimensional process shaped by trauma, resilience, integration, and intercultural encounter. Taken together, the four themes reveal that this migration cannot be understood solely as a political event. Rather, it represents a profound reconfiguration of personal identity, social belonging, moral orientation, and cultural engagement. The narratives analyzed illustrate how forced displacement unfolds simultaneously as rupture and reconstruction, loss and opportunity, vulnerability and agency. Across the accounts, trauma emerges as a deeply relational and existential experience. Participants describe family fragmentation, institutional betrayal, social stigmatization, and the erosion of professional identities as central components of their displacement. These experiences reflect forms of ambiguous loss, moral injury, and epistemic violence that extended beyond the initial act of persecution. It is also evident that integration is interpreted not as a passive adaptation, but as a service-oriented reciprocal process. Despite initial downward mobility and the challenges of language acquisition, participants rebuild their professional lives through volunteering, persistence, and the transfer of expertise. Their high job retention rates and successful reintegration into specialized fields underscores both their adaptability and the structural value they bring to host societies. Integration is framed as a two-way process. Migrants contribute civic engagement, educational labor, and community building practices while embracing local norms and institutional frameworks. Their presence challenges stereotypes about Islam and Turkish identity, offering alternative representations grounded in ethical conduct, dialogue, and everyday interaction. Through hospitality, intercultural learning, and civic participations, migrants contribute to reshaping local perceptions and, in some cases, influencing institutional approaches to integration. While emotional ties to Turkey persist, most participants now locate their sense of home in their countries of adoption. It was mentioned here as well. So for most of them, the new country of adoption is really the new home. A small number of people are considering, actually only two of the participants were considering going back to Turkey if the conditions permit. So this is a reflection of a reconfigured understanding of belonging that differentiates affection for people from disillusionment with state institutions. This migration is not merely a response to political repression, but a profound process of becoming, one that reshapes identities, worldviews, and the possibilities of coexistence in pluralistic context. This analysis positions the migration of Hizmet members as a theoretically rich case that illuminates the intersections of trauma, agency, ethics, and intercultural negotiations with its own dynamics that could be compared to the previous kinds of migrations in the history. So I will not take more of your time. I just conclude by stating that this ongoing study demonstrates that forced migration is not only a political and a social process, but also a profound moral and existential transformation, offering new directions for theorizing displacement in contemporary context. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Arvind. This phrase used, you are different kinds of Muslims. It's really special, isn't it? This community is special, and we have to acknowledge that. If you have experienced what he said, identity destruction, and earlier Hilal was saying biographical death. These are loaded phrases, right? I mean, they capture the trauma, and still you are a different kind of Muslim. So it's something to be cherished and to be celebrated. And I think that's why Hizmet attracts so many people from across the world, because they are different. It's a very important point. Okay, last but not least, we have Rainer Hermann, who is going to speak about the Hizmet refugees in Germany. It's of course known that Turkish migrants have been going to Germany for many decades. But this is a new influx, and it will be interesting to hear from him how the Germans are distinguishing between the new arrivals and the previous Turkish migrants, the perception, the gap between the two, and also what is the relationship between the Hizmet refugees who have gone recently in the last 10 years vis-a-vis the Turkish who have been there for many decades in the past. Do they get along? Are there conflicts? Very interesting subject. Rainer, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, first let me thank the organizers. You are doing a great job. My name is Rainer Hermann. I have been covering as editor for the German daily Frankfurter Allgemeine the Middle East and Turkey for 35 years, and I'm covering the Hizmet movements since 30 years. 20 years in Turkey, 10 years past 10 years in Germany. The Hizmet movement has started in Turkey, that's the birthplace, but Anatolian soil produced a marvelous tree, and it was spreading to other countries. It was spreading mainly to Germany. Germany has more members and followers of the Hizmet movement than any other country, except, of course, Turkey. I want to talk not just about the contribution of the refugees of the Hizmet movement, but in general what the Hizmet movement has contributed to the society in Germany. Germany has a population of 84 million people. 25 million of them are either immigrants or having descendants from immigrants. And with 3 million, the Turks are the biggest group. 1.6 million of them have German. 1.6 million of them have a German passport, and the Turkish originated German citizens are well integrated thanks to the work also of Hizmet. So that brings me to my first point, the successful integration of the Turkish migrants to German society. And the second pre-remark is they have widened their focus and apply what they have learned in this first step to other migrants, most recently from those from Syria. First, I would like to start with a brief history of Hizmet in Germany, starting in 1989. 1989, followers of Mr. Gulen, whom we also know by his honorary title, Hoca Effendi, are starting to meet in sohbet groups. And they want to establish a new mosque, but they discover there's no need for mosque, there's need for education, and so they refigure their agenda and they take actions. In 1990, establishment of an editorial office of the Turkish newspaper Zaman and a special edition for Germany. 1992, the first educational institution, first tutoring courses publicly recognized. 2001, the first institution for dialogue in Munich. 2004, the first secondary school opened in Stuttgart. 2013, an umbrella group of all these diverse movements, institutions, initiatives is being established in Berlin, being used as a bridge builder between the migrant society and politicians and society, just to organize as the understanding and the contacts. 2013 also, the start of the persecution of the Hizmet movement in Turkey, and since then roughly 50,000 members of them, most of them illegally, have left Turkey and have settled in Germany. Most of them are university graduates. They learn German quickly, and most of them are working since then in their original profession in Germany. The advantages of Germany is close to Turkey, security, no extradition to the regime in Turkey, and Germany a free society with problems all other European countries have presently. 2016, the turning point. Turkey becomes a country of repression, and in Germany the movement is opening up. More people of non-Turkish background are integrated, are coming to the movement, and also, very interestingly, a new second generation is growing within the Hizmet movement with the German mindset and organizing the global networking of Hizmet. So, second point, the contribution to the German society, to integration and dialogue, a remarkable contribution to integration and the culture of dialogue. I want to highlight 5 points. Let's start as a journalist with media. One of the very few quality newspapers of Turkey had been Zaman. And their German edition was, differently from other Turkish newspapers, encouraging the integration of migrants into the German society and was reporting positively about the country. They have contributed to the culture of reading by distributing books through the subscription to the newspaper. Second point, education. Supporters of Mr. Gülen run presently above around 30 private schools, which are part of the public school system. Until 2016, most of the students came from Turkish origin, but from fear of reprisal by the Turkish state, many parents withdrew their kids. So the schools were opened up to students of non-Turkish origin. And the school still tells a lot for which the Hizmet movement stands for: commitment. I rarely see in a German public school teachers as committed as they are in the Hizmet schools. The parents committed in extracurricular activities so that the kids do more than just sit in the study rooms. And so the German government recognizes these achievements by covering from, let's say, 67 to 99% of the costs of these schools by the German taxpayers. Third element, interfaith dialogue. Although the Hizmet movement sees itself not as a religious movement, but as a civil society movement and a grassroots movement. It is also, of course, a religious movement. And this is shown by the house, so-called House of One in Berlin. Three monotheistic religions came together, joined forces to build this House of One. With the synagogue, we have heard, with the synagogue, church, and the mosque, and the representatives go into schools, go into public life to teach about their religions, to reduce the prejudice against them, to be a place of context for the politicians, for public decision makers. Another point, interfaith dialogue. Members of the Hizmet movement invite in Ramadan neighbors, friends, other people to sit down with them and to break the fast iftar in the home. In Ramadan last year, there had been more than 60,000 invitations. Another example, the yearly Noah festival. Prophet Noah is prophets to all three monotheistic religions once a year. We come together on a ship, on a river, just to celebrate our common memories of the Prophet Noah. So media education, interfaith dialogue. Number 4, social responsibility. As a civil society institution, they contribute to a culture of dialogue, for example, by awarding every year the so-called German Dialogue Prize to individuals and to institutions which have given a special contribution to intercultural and interreligion dialogue. And the people honored there are from the well-known strata in German society. Another example, the foundation of a human rights defenders organization, or programs, projects for the prevention of extremism. Culture, number 5, next to religion, society, culture. More than 60 cultural centers are named according to the great mystic Rumi. They offer spaces for adults, for kids to learn Arabic, to go Quranic schools, and so on. Also, Friday prayers are held since 2016 in those Rumi centers. Thirdly, what impact beyond? What impact beyond Germany? One is integration courses. And these integration courses show how much the Hizmet movement in Germany have become a valued part of the German society. These integration courses have started 2007, being organized by Hizmet, and they consist of 2 parts. On one hand, language courses, 600 units for language courses, ending with the test, and also 100 teaching courses live in Germany, also ending with the text. And both are then a condition for people having migrated to Germany, want to integrate to get a good job. And this expertise was first won from 2007, 2008 with Turkish originated migrants, but since then it is awarded to the target group is now refugees from Syria. Impact number 2, time for help. Hizmet is involved in international development cooperation. First it was Kimse Yokmu in Turkey, later on refounded in Germany, close to Frankfurt, where I come from. Sister organizations in many other countries in Europe. And their finances are completely from donations, and they're working together with international partners in poor countries where they, with their partners, for example, build and maintain schools, orphanages, water wells, distribute food, open libraries. Another example, acquiring sewage machines for vocational schools, and so on. Recipients are not discriminated. There are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Hindus, and so on. A third example, the Olympiads. First, it has started in 2003, the so-called International Turkish Language Olympiad. Participants 17 years. People who learn outside Turkey could be rewarded by this Olympiad for their effort. It was expanded then later on to the International Language and Culture Olympiad, being organized from Germany. First, you have on different countries kept competitions, and then they come together to the final every year. This year, at the beginning of June in Stuttgart in the Porsche Arena. To conclude, the commitment of Hizmet in Germany is impressive and extraordinary. What motivates them? When I asked once a refugee from Syria, he said, a refugee from Turkey after 2016, he said, I was welcomed here, the German society helped me, and now I want to give back. I see two motives flowing into each other. One side, faith. Members of Hizmet strive for Allah Rizas, God's goodwill. Life is a spiritual journey. Man is not living alone, but in a community and has and should help his neighbors. And the other one is in worldly terms, our societies need role models. Those who are successful should and can inspire others. And this is what Hizmet Movement is standing for. So my last sentence, if everyone would have this sense of community, the world definitely would be a better one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rainer. I think I was so struck by one of the phrases he used, which is some of the refugees have adopted the German mindset, coping mechanisms. Those who study forced displacement, one of the coping mechanisms is to be able to assimilate into the new country of domicile while sustaining your core cultural identity. And this is, of course, the big dilemma for those who, the migrants or the refugees. Okay, we have heard from the scholars here who are doing detailed studies of this phenomenon of the Hizmet in exile. So let me open up to questions. Please direct them to one of the panelists and please keep them short. We started the session late, but maybe 10 minutes we'll have to wrap this up. So please raise your hand and direct a question at anyone in the panel. Yes, sir, please. If you can get a mic. कोई है जी मोबाइल माइक है ये वाले ले जाइए यहाँ से ले जाइए नीचे दे दीजिए volunteers, can we have someone handling the mics, please? Yes, sir, please. We'll collect a few questions and then have a set of responses. Yes.
So my name is Mehmet Tan from Munich, Germany. My question about this expression. I heard personally a lot of time also this expression, you are different Muslims and so on. So maybe it's a little bit critical or critic about it if they are really different. And if they are really different, then what kind of differences can you say about it? Who knows the Hizmet people can answer this question, please?
Yeah, that was the comment of a German official, I think, or an immigration. Yeah. So how are they different? How are Hizmet Muslims different from others? That's an interesting question.
I think the difference doesn't reside so much in the way how they represent the Islam. Yeah, if we speak especially about Germany now, because we cannot generalize all worldwide, as it's much more something to do with the people that are actually coming together and they are interacting. So what they say, the local people, the Germans were saying was that we used to live with Muslim neighbors, be them Arabs or people coming from North Africa or Turkish people, but there was no interaction at all. neither from our side nor from their side. And especially there is this. It becomes proverbial now. We keep hearing we've been hearing for years. There are special locations, whole quarters, neighborhoods where Muslims reside. When a German local comes in to buy something, they say tourists came over. You know, in the middle of Europe. So this shows or talks about the lack of interaction between the communities. What Hizmet movement brought in a natural way, because there is this forced displacement that we've been talking about after 2016, was exactly this tradition of taking that step, taking the initiative, and getting to interact with these people, with the local people. And of course, you get to know each other. The barriers, the misconceptions, preconceptions, they are all brought down in this way. The dialogue basically starts. And this is, of course, not surprising, because this is what Hizmet movement representatives have been doing for so many years, even when everything was all right in Turkey. The difference is that they made now is this huge displacement of a big mass of people coming in and making that positive change. This is, I think we have to look into this aspect to understand better why there's this.
Yes.
It's about
Yes, ma'am.
integration.
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Thanks a lot, first of all, for these three wonderful contributions. I feel very nurtured by this empirically. Guest worker women who were still able to participate in society without the skills, without the educational background, without the language skills, and they still could. So I'm asked myself, isn't there a tension in a way in this praising of this highly educated, which is of course is like very beneficial, but what about those who don't have these backgrounds and you know, because they're also very successful in what they're doing, and I think there was a lot of value in that. And the second is about this rupture. I'm asking myself how the Hizmet philosophy. I remember myself being in Tanzania when the rupture. It was before the military coup attempt, but there was a way how. I would say there was a preparation, in a way, an ideological preparation, you could maybe say, to what might happen. It wasn't foreseen, of course, but I felt there was already a way where people recentered to the values, because you could see the rupture already. People were leaving the movement, and there was a lot of, it was a very tense time already before the Turkish military coup attempt. So how did this rupture, I felt the movement that really went back to the core values, how did this help, how did this become also part of the resilience of the movement?
Right.
And just one quick question for clarification. I didn't understand your point about the epistemic injustice or violence that you mentioned. If you could clarify it quickly.
Okay, great. Sharp and Hilal, you want to? There was a question about class distinctions between the refugees and different classes, different professional groups. Are there variations? Yeah, it's on. It's on.
I would say we should be aware to make this mistake of compare groups, especially if they are refugees and resilient or vulnerable. And in Germany we have this case that they say these refugees are really well educated and they will make it and they will be integrated. And I think we should be aware to reproduce these narratives which are not really well in a heterogeneous society. I would say, as a person who is in Hizmet, we have to be honest, we have to say this too. We have sometimes problems to integrate internal in the community self. That means for example, me, I'm in the third generation in Germany. My grandfather came as a typical Gastarbeiter, and I would say, for myself, I'm a hybrid. I'm German as Turkish, and I never had this belonging to this homeland Turkey, but I'm still intact with my roots. So there is a difference if you are not a refugee, and now we have this constellation that for the first time in Germany we have such a heterogenic community. We have so many people who are forced migration experienced, and that those who came nearby 20 years ago, and are living and would say they are already German, and we have those who are really born in Germany and have this transnational identity. And this is really so huge that we are not able to subsume it in one fact and say these are the good guys and these are the ugly guys. I would say it's much more difficult, and we have to be aware to reproduce narratives which would be disrupt this integration and this harmony.
Okay. You want, Rainer, you please. The other question.
I also would like to. Okay. On the question, well, who was first? Who was first educated? I make a difference between Miligorish Muslims and Hizmet Muslims. The Miligorish is a movement from Necmettin Erbakan to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a very politicized Islam. And when I look, well, who is representing them in Germany? It's blue-collar workers, looking Turkish TV, speaking Germany on a very low level, and not very much interested in joining the German society. If I compare that with the Hizmet Muslims, they are well educated, speak excellent German. They don't look Turkish TV, at least not to that extent what the Refa Muslims do. So they are the Muslims we really must welcome, because they are not the problem makers, they are the problem solvers. And therefore I think, well, sometimes journalists simplify, but sometimes it's necessary to simplify to understand, well, the mechanisms. And I do see that the Hizmet Muslims have started earlier than the others to understand the benefits of education. Let me just finish with a remark on the mindset. I definitely meant a German mindset based on the Turkish culture, and that's the perfect formula.
There was a question about epistemic, usage of epistemic.
Talking about the education level, if we are to consider some general characteristics of the representatives of the Hizmet movement, or members of the Hizmet movement, among some attributes, definitely education is one that comes at the top. We cannot deny that. So that's why it's not surprising that these changes that the large mass of migration brought had its background this good education and the anchoring in faith. The strong anchoring in faith. These are the two important aspects that pertain to most of these Hizmet movement representatives. Of course, can we say they're not exceptions? Obviously they are. For instance, I didn't have the time here to touch upon that subject, but there are also housewives, for instance, who are not maybe educated up to the high school level, let's say. And back in Turkey, they weren't working. That's why they're called housewives. They didn't have a career. But even in that case, we discovered that they found out through this cultural encounter that they have not been judged by wearing a headscarf, for instance. Can you imagine? In a Muslim country, you come from a Muslim country, you are judged there due to the polarized society by your headscarf. But you go in a country like Germany, UK, or whatsoever, and you are not judged by that, by the way you look, by your age, or whatever else. This actually encouraged even the housewives to take part into the community. And there are many of these cases that I have documented who have started university, studying at university, learning, picking up the language at C1, C2 level. Those of you who are Germans or who speak German, I think know what this means. To be a foreigner, to start picking up German and learning at C1 level after 40. It's not easy, but this is due to this educational background. It's not possible otherwise. So, of course, there is also this category of people, but the largest mass falls in this category I tried to mention. And this is what made the big difference, actually, the great positive attitude.
Right.
And you were also, you mentioned,
there was a question about the usage of epistemic violence.
Oh, okay. It's
could you clarify that?
The epistemic injustice and violence that comes from, again, the proposition of these participants who said, I gave the example of the person who was working at the Ministry of Health. So imagine you are doing very good, you are very much praised, you got some certificates of appreciation even recognized by the state government, and then suddenly you are labeled a terrorist, you are labeled as a person that works against the interest of the state, and you are dismissed from your work. There are lots of people who were scholars who had a lot of budgets under their hands at their disposal to use in research, who made a huge contribution to the development of the universities. We're in a university and we know what that means. And suddenly they were dismissed. We're talking, the statistics talk about 7,000 scholars and researchers that had to flee the country. It's an immense loss for a nation.
Yeah.
You can imagine.
So knowledge has been destroyed. Okay, we are running out of time.
Examples of this kind, but I didn't have time to
in
touch upon
fact,
it.
you know, the last session is supposed to finish at 5:45, and we are still in the previous session, so we'll have to speed up. Sir, pointed questions, no more remarks and comments, please. Just a question. We'll take 2 more, and that's it.
Thank you, Harman. Now, in terms of German mindset, Welt and Song, and there's a beautiful German poem, Gedenken der Frei. Which German mindset? Because the other question is, it is not enough that the guest arbeiters learn German. How many Germans learn Turkish? So therefore, this is also an epistemic violence, a celebration of a model of integration which is based upon disrespect. My quick query to Hilal is, thank you, but in
Sir,
terms...
one question, please.
No, just you gave time to others. Very quickly, half a second. Now, in terms of your understanding of this persecuted, you said that they do not harbor, a sense of hatred. But in what level we are talking about? Maybe at the manifest level, but the implicit level. But without quarreling about it, the point is, what are the dimensions of self-critique and ethical reflexivity that these people narrate to you, which you didn't explain, but you could kindly...
Thank you, sir. Quick responses, Rainer, and then Hilal.
I think that question was based on missing knowledge. Şimdi den itibaren Türkçe konuşabiliyoruz. Yani Türkçe biliyor musunuz? Hemen Türkçe konuşuyoruz. Niçin böyle aptal bir soru sordunuz?
Translation, please.
I just ask you, well, obviously you don't know the German society. Well, I'm one of, I guess, not few, but more and more Germans who speak Turkish. And there is a flourishing cultural scene based on Turkish artists, which are a part of the German art scene. Look at the German parliament, how many Turkish originated politicians are sitting there. And I guess that we would have to check that empirically. Turkish is certainly, after English and after French, most probably the most taught foreign language in German schools.
Hilal, you want to respond to the second question about...
Well, in my study, in this case of 20 biographical interviews, I had no interview where no self-reflection was documented. That means that they are re-questioning their position in the community, in Hizmet, and also in their belonging and identity. That means there are so hardly and deep ongoing processes. Maybe I had to add that my interview partners, most of them were still in Turkey. They had home arrest. That means they had to stay at home or were left prison a few weeks ago. And those who were not anymore in Turkey were not longer than 1 year out of Turkey. That means the trauma is still really fresh, and we are not able to talk about integration so that we can close up this process of re-questioning or new repositioning. But there was such an ongoing process. I had the possibility to catch it up, and I'm still in contact with some of them. What I can document with my data, that means it's not for all of the community members who had to live this forced migration. They are adapted in the community back, and this contact to this community, this safe space, is an ability to integrate in the new societies faster than at those who are completely isolated and not able to make this integration in the new society.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very fascinating panel because many of you in the audience are also part of this exiled community. We know this, and all of you will have very strong views and feelings about what has been happening in the last 10 years and the exodus out of Turkey. But I think the panel deserves applause because they have actually researched and conducted so many interviews and studies in a very, very granular fashion, to extract some analytical content which we can all reflect upon. Because what they are all saying is many of you are actually living those experiences or are actually part of these studies in a way, because you can also relate to what they are saying about the characteristics of the Hizmet community in exile. So it has some strengths. It has been pointed out. They integrate a lot better. They are more open, not insular, and therefore they are more welcomed in the European societies or wherever they go in the world. But I will leave you with the thought that maybe it also has weaknesses, because if you are so willing to adapt and to take on your new homeland as the future, then maybe you will no longer be as willing to bring about change in Turkey, right? The political question. If you are happy becoming a German or a French or a Swiss and living there for next generations to come, then how will you retake Turkey, and how will you save your own homeland? So there is a dilemma there between integration and the political activism, but this is not the time for it. I just wanted to throw out that idea at the end, but thank you. Let's give them a big applause for high quality research. Thank you, folks. This session is over. We'll have a quick break right outside, and then we have 2 final parallel sessions. Let me mention, there's one in this venue. It's on cultural diplomacy, dialogue and civic engagement. There's another one in the faculty block, the Imaginarium, which some of you went to in the morning. That is on Hizmet as a catalyst for peace.